The crunch of metal on gravel still echoes in my ears. It was just past sunset, the air cooling fast across the wide stretch of my ranch, cicadas buzzing, and the faint orange glow clinging to the horizon. I had just set down my coffee mug on the porch rail when I heard it again. Tires screeching, headlights bouncing in the dark. And then that sound I'd come to dread. The shattering, splintering crash of my mailbox being torn from the post. I bolted to the end of the long dirt driveway, heart hammering. Dust clouds swirled, choking the night air, while two black SUVs with magnetic police decals slapped across their doors sped away, red and blue flashers snapping on and off like some grotesque joke. They weren't real cops. They were the HOA's little army, the neighborhood enforcers who thought they could intimidate me into silence, and they'd done it again. My mailbox, flattened, mangled, ripped open like a crushed soda can. Envelopes spilled out into the ditch, fluttering in the cool wind. My property tax bill, a letter from my grandson in the military, and worst of all, the prescription meds I was waiting on. Scattered and ruined, some lost in the mud forever, I dropped to my knees in the dirt, fists clenched. This wasn't the first time, not the second, not even the fifth. No, this was the eighth mailbox I'd had to replace in just under a year. Every time I'd dig a new hole, pour new concrete, paint the post, set up the box, thinking maybe this time they'd leave me alone, it was always the same. Within days, sometimes hours, those fake cops would come roaring down my lane and smash it to pieces. Neighbors whispered about them, said they weren't real police but friends of the HOA president. Said they were using intimidation tactics to scare me off the board meetings, to stop me from speaking up. I'd seen them at meetings, standing behind him with crossed arms, sunglasses on indoors. They weren't cops. They were hired thugs. And I knew what message they were sending me tonight. Stop resisting. Stop fighting. Or next time it won't just be your mailbox. I stood up slowly, gravel crunching under my boots, blood roaring in my ears. My hands shook, not just from anger, but from something deeper, something primal. I'd fought bigger bullies in my life. I'd been through harder wars than this. But standing there in the twilight, watching my mail drift into the weeds, I felt an old fire rise inside me. The HOA thought they'd broken me. They thought I'd back down, stay quiet, let them run the neighborhood like their personal kingdom. But as I looked at the wreckage of my mailbox, an idea sparked. One so crazy, so bold, I almost laughed right there in the dark. They wanted to play games? Fine. They wanted to ram their shiny SUVs into my property? Fine. This time I wasn't going to rebuild a mailbox. This time I was going to build a fortress. And when they came back, and I knew they would, they'd never see it coming. I wasn't supposed to live a life of neighborhood wars. At 60 years old, I had carved out what I thought would be my peace. My wife and I had bought this ranch 30 years ago, when the land was cheap and the county lines still felt like freedom. Back then, there wasn't a homeowners association, just farmers, ranchers, and families who minded their own business. The ranch is my pride. 20 acres of scrub oak and mesquite, a long gravel drive lined with barbed wire fence, and the low, wide barn painted red by my own hands. Inside, the smell of hay and diesel still carries me back to my younger days, back when I used to mend fences and break horses at dawn. These days, my body's slower, stiffer, but the land still responds to my touch. And the mailbox? Well, that was always more than just a box on a stick. That post stood at the edge of my property line like a handshake with the outside world. Letters from my kids, bills I worked hard to pay, tools and seeds I ordered to keep the ranch alive. You don't tear that down without tearing into me. But about 5 years ago, everything started changing. It began with slick brochures in the mail, boasting about community development and ranch lifestyle neighborhoods. Developers had bought up land nearby, carving it into neat little 1-acre lots with beige stucco houses. They brought in new families, young professionals, city folk who wanted the country feel without the country work. And then came the thing that still haunts me, the HOA. At first, they claimed they just wanted to keep standards, keep the weeds trimmed, Make sure fences don't rot. No junk cars on the lawns. But it grew. Like a weed, it spread into every corner of life. What color barns could be? Where do you park? When you could mow? And then came he, Travis Cole. 35 years old, hair slicked back, sharp suit even in the middle of Texas heat. He was the new HOA president, and he played the part like a king wearing a crown. Charisma oozed off him, and half the new residents ate it up. But I saw something colder in his eyes, a hunger for control, the kind I'd seen in officers and bosses who thrived on fear. I'll never forget our first clash. I was at the board meeting, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the folding chairs filled with nervous neighbors. Travis tapped his gavel and said in that smooth voice of his, "Mr. Harris, your barn roof doesn't meet community code. We'll need you to repaint it in earth tones." I stared at him across the table, calloused hands folded, trying not to laugh. That roof's been red since Reagan was president. It was red when I bought this land. No one complained for 3 decades. He smiled, a thin, cruel smile. "Well, times change. We want the neighborhood to look uniform. You'll need to comply within 30 days or face fines." Neighbors glanced at each other, some shifting in their seats. Nobody spoke up, not a single one. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about weeds or paint. This was about power. I refused, of course, and that was the first time I noticed the black SUVs parked at the end of my drive, engines idling. Men with buzz cuts and mirrored sunglasses are watching me fix a fence. No badges, but radios clipped to their belts. It started small, letters in my mailbox about fines. Then came phone calls, hang-ups in the middle of the night. A neighbor whispered to me at the grocery store, "Those guys? They're not cops. Travis hires them, calls them his security team." The intimidation worked on others. People painted their barns beige, trimmed their lawns to the inch. They paid fines just to avoid trouble, but not me, and that's when my mailbox became their target. The first time it was knocked over, I figured it was kids. The second time, it might have been a drunk driver. But then I saw it with my own eyes. The black SUV, speeding down my lane, swerving deliberately into the post. The driver laughed as he sped off. And sitting in the passenger seat, Travis himself, sunglasses glinting in the sun. That night, I sat on the porch, staring at the broken post, the mail scattered in the dirt. My wife put a hand on my shoulder, her eyes tired but steady. "They're trying to break you, Bill. They want you to quit. Don't let them." Her words settled deep in my chest. I'd survived worse than bullies in pressed suits. I'd built this ranch with my own 2 hands, and I wasn't about to let some power-hungry kid and his toy cops run me off. Still, I could feel the stakes tightening like a noose. If I didn't back down, I could lose more than a mailbox. Fines were stacking up in letters I refused to pay. Rumors swirled that Travis wanted to foreclose on anyone who resisted for too long, and with every crash of splintering wood at the end of my driveway, I knew they weren't just aiming at property anymore. They were aiming at me. The question that haunted me was simple, but terrifying. How far would Travis go to silence me? And just as important, how far was I willing to go to fight back? I didn't know the answer yet, but as I looked out at the dark fields, the wind rattling the barbed wire like bones, I swore one thing. I wasn't going down quietly, and that promise, that stubborn refusal to be broken, was exactly what would turn this small war over a mailbox into something far bigger and far more dangerous than I ever imagined. The morning after that last crash, I stood at the end of my driveway, staring at the bent metal and splintered wood. The mailbox was canted sideways like a wounded soldier, the post sheared clean in half. I should have been used to it by now, but the sight still twisted something deep inside me. I dug out the old post hole digger from the barn, the wooden handles worn smooth from decades of calluses. Sweat poured down my back as I hauled the broken post out and set another in its place. I knew it was useless, that by nightfall it would probably be flattened again, but I couldn't stand the thought of leaving it broken. As I tamped the dirt around the new post, a black SUV rolled slowly past the property line. The windows were tinted, but I felt their eyes on me, felt that smug satisfaction radiating from behind the glass. The SUV didn't stop. It didn't need to. Its message was clear. We're watching you. That week, the letters came thicker and faster. White envelopes with the HOA logo stamped on them in smug blue ink. Non-compliance fine, $500. Failure to repaint barn roof, $1,000. Failure to maintain community standards, $1,500. I tossed them into a shoebox in the kitchen without opening most of them. My wife warned me, Bill, they'll use this against us. They'll stack up the fines until they claim we're in default. I'm not paying them a dime, I said, my voice flat. If they want to fight, they'll get one. But the pressure kept mounting. It wasn't just the mailbox anymore. One afternoon, I found a bright yellow citation taped to my front gate. Unauthorized livestock. My head snapped back in disbelief. I'd had cattle on this land for 30 years. Suddenly, the HOA decided cows weren't aesthetic enough. I stormed into the next board meeting, citation in hand. The room was packed, neighbors lined in rows of folding chairs under the buzz of fluorescent lights. Travis sat at the head of the table, his suit jacket crisp, his smile rehearsed. Mr. Harris, he drawled, thank you for attending. I assume you're here about your livestock issue. I slapped the paper down on the table so hard it echoed. This is my land. These are my cattle. You don't get to decide what's authorized when I've been here longer than you've been alive. The room went silent. A few neighbors avoided my gaze, staring at their hands. One older woman gave me a sympathetic glance, but she said nothing. Travis leaned back in his chair, lacing his fingers. Rules are rules, Bill. The community deserves consistency. Consistency? I barked. You want consistency? How about consistently leaving people alone to live their lives? Travis's smile never faltered, but his eyes, they gleamed, cold and sharp. Non-compliance fines will continue to accumulate until the issue is resolved. This meeting is adjourned. The gavel slammed, and just like that, I was dismissed. From then on, it felt like they were testing me, inch by inch. The fake cops started patrolling past my house more often, their headlights sweeping the fields at midnight. One morning, I found the gate to my pasture unlatched, my cattle wandering dangerously close to the road. Another day, my water line had been mysteriously cut, flooding a ditch until the mud swallowed half my driveway. It was psychological warfare, and it was working on the neighbors. The Johnsons, who used to wave every morning, now crossed the street when they saw me coming. The Ramirez family, who once shared barbecue on weekends, stopped inviting me altogether. Fear had silenced them. They'd seen what happened when someone stood up, and they wanted no part of it. I couldn't blame them, but it stung all the same. The ranch that had once felt like home was beginning to feel like an island under siege. Late one night, I sat on the porch with a bottle of whiskey, staring out at the dark fields. My wife came out, pulling her sweater tight against the chill. You're burning yourself up, she said softly. I didn't answer right away. The crickets chirped in the silence, and the wind rattled the porch screens. They won't stop, Bill, not until you bend. Her voice cracked. What if next time it's not the mailbox? What if it's the barn? What if it's us? Her words hung heavy in the air. I'd faced down men in worse circumstances. But this was different. This was home. This was the woman I loved, the land I'd built a life on. And now it was all under siege by a man half my age with a taste for power. I reached over, squeezed her hand. I'm not going to let them win. But even as I said it, doubt gnawed at me. Could one man stand against an entire machine designed to crush dissent? Mailbox number 9 lasted 3 days. On the 4th, I heard the roar of an engine at midnight. I rushed to the window in time to see headlights barreling down my driveway. The crash echoed like thunder, and the laughter of men rolled across the night air. By the time I reached the road, they were gone, leaving only the twisted wreck of yet another box, another post, another blow to my pride. I stood there barefoot in the gravel, chest heaving, rage boiling over. My fists clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. And that's when I knew. They weren't going to stop. Not until I gave them something they couldn't laugh at. The next morning, I loaded up the truck and drove into town. I didn't go to the hardware store this time. No flimsy wood posts or thin-gauge mailboxes. I went to the steel yard. As I walked through the rows of beams and plates, the smell of hot iron and oil filled my lungs. My hand brushed across cold steel, thick and unyielding. An idea had taken root in me, and now it burned like fire. If they wanted to ram my mailbox, fine. But this time, they'd be the ones left broken. Word spread fast when I started building. Out in the barn, sparks flew from the welding torch, the sharp smell of molten steel filling the air. I cut, shaped, and bolted until sweat stung my eyes. My wife shook her head, but she didn't stop me. She knew I needed this. Neighbors slowed their cars when they passed, craning their necks to see what I was up to. I caught whispers at the feed store. Bill's cooking up something out there, some kind of monster mailbox. Let them whisper. Let Travis hear. I wanted him to know I wasn't done. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about a mailbox anymore. It was about drawing a line in the dirt and daring Travis to cross it, and I had no doubt he would. By the time I was finished, my creation stood like a sentinel at the end of my driveway. Solid steel core, welded plates, anchored in concrete so deep it could stop a tank. I painted it black, the surface gleaming under the Texas sun. To anyone else, it looked like a mailbox, but I knew the truth. It was a trap. And when those black SUVs came roaring down my lane again, everything would change. The night they came back, the air felt different. I was on the porch, rocking slowly in the creaking chair, the weight of silence pressing down on the ranch. The cicadas were quiet. Even the cattle were still. A storm of dust had blown in earlier, leaving the night air heavy with grit, clinging to my skin like sandpaper. I could feel it in my bones. The storm wasn't outside. It was coming straight down my driveway. At midnight, I heard it. The low growl of an engine, then another. Headlights crested the hill, bouncing, weaving like predators circling their prey. Two black SUVs, the fake cops, speeding side by side. I didn't move. I just sat there, hands gripping the armrests, jaw clenched. I knew what was about to happen. They thought this would be mailbox number 10. Another night of laughter, another victory for Travis. The SUVs roared closer, tires spitting gravel, the air thick with exhaust. I could see their faces this time, the grins, the smug confidence. And behind the wheel of the lead car, I saw him, Travis himself. "Come on then," I muttered under my breath. "Try it." The first SUV swerved, lining up for the kill. The driver gunned it, headlights blazing. And then, impact. The sound was like a cannon blast, a scream of tearing metal, shattering glass, grinding steel on steel. The armored mailbox didn't budge, not an inch. The SUV, though, it crumpled like a tin can. The front end folded, the hood buckling, the radiator hissing steam into the night. Airbags exploded, muffling the curses and shouts inside. The second SUV slammed brakes too late, fishtailing across the gravel, smashing into the ditch with a sickening crunch. Silence fell for a moment, broken only by the hiss of fluids leaking onto the ground. And then came the shouting. Doors flew open, men stumbled out, coughing, swearing. Travis dragged himself out of the passenger side, face pale with fury and shock. His suit was torn, and blood streaked his forehead. "You son of a—" he screamed, pointing at me on the porch. "You set us up!" I rose slowly, the rocking chair creaking behind me, and walked to the edge of the porch. My boots thudded heavily on the boards. "No, Travis," I said, voice low but caring. "You set yourself up. I just got tired of rebuilding." The fake cops gathered around him, shaken but still posturing. One pulled a gun halfway from his holster, but Travis snapped. "Not here. Not now." He wiped blood from his cheek, glaring at me with murder in his eyes. "You think you're clever, old man? You think this is over?" His voice cracked, wild now, stripped of its smooth polish. "I'll ruin you. I'll foreclose your ranch. I'll bleed you dry in court. You'll regret this." But then, headlights again. Not SUVs this time. Sheriff cruisers, real ones. The red and blue glare lit up the whole road, painting the wreckage in harsh color. Neighbors' porch lights flicked on up and down the street, doors opening, voices murmuring. People were stepping out, gathering in clusters, staring at the scene unfolding. The sheriff stepped out, hand on his belt, eyes narrowing as he took in the smashed SUVs, the armored mailbox gleaming in the beams. He turned to Travis. "What in God's name happened here?" Travis straightened his torn suit, trying to compose himself. "This man, he set a trap. That mailbox is illegal. We were patrolling the neighborhood and—" "Patrolling?" The sheriff cut in, eyebrow raised. "Since when does an HOA run midnight patrols in unmarked SUVs?" Travis stammered. We're authorized security." The sheriff turned slowly, his gaze sweeping over the wreckage, the men still clutching their bruised ribs, the decals peeling half off the SUV doors. Then his eyes landed on me. "Bill, you want to explain?" I stepped down from the porch, gravel crunching under my boots. "Sheriff, they've been smashing my mailboxes for a year. 8 times. I warned them. The neighbors saw it, and tonight they tried again. Only this time, they hit something that hit back." The sheriff studied me for a long moment. Then he looked at Travis, whose mask of confidence was slipping fast under the weight of 100 staring eyes. And then came the voice from the crowd. An older neighbor, Mr. Johnson, stepping forward with his wife. "Sheriff, he's telling the truth. We've all seen those SUVs. We've all been too scared to say anything, but he's right. They've been terrorizing him, terrorizing all of us." The murmurs swelled. One by one, neighbors stepped closer, nodding, speaking up. "They fined me for having a pickup in my driveway. They threatened to foreclose on us. They told my kids to stop playing in the yard." The sheriff's face hardened. He turned back to Travis. "Sounds like you've got a lot more to answer for than a busted SUV." Travis's composure cracked. His voice rose, shrill, desperate. "You can't prove anything. These people are liars. You can't touch me." But then I pulled something from my pocket, the small black recorder I'd been carrying for weeks. I clicked it on, and the tinny playback filled the night. Travis's voice, clear as day. "Run it down again tonight. Make sure Harris gets the message. If he doesn't pay up, we'll bleed him out with fines until he's gone." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The sheriff's jaw tightened. "Travis Cole," he said, stepping forward, "you're under arrest for harassment, property destruction, and criminal conspiracy." The sheriff's deputies moved in, cuffing him as he shouted, wild and frantic, his voice breaking. "You can't do this. I run this neighborhood. I own you people. You'll regret this." But his words were swallowed by the sound of cuffs clicking shut, the crowd's murmurs swelling into something new, something that hadn't been heard in this community in a long time. Relief. As Travis was shoved into the back of the cruiser, I looked around at the faces of my neighbors. For the first time, they weren't looking away. They were looking at me. Some nodded. Some smiled faintly. And in their eyes, I saw something I thought I'd lost. Hope. I turned back to the armored mailbox, still standing tall at the edge of my land. Not a scratch on it. A sentinel. A reminder. This war wasn't over yet. Not until the system Travis built was dismantled. But tonight, a battle had been won. And I'd made sure he'd never forget it. The morning after Travis's arrest, the neighborhood felt different. For the first time in years, there were no black SUVs idling at the end of my driveway. No engines prowling in the night. No decals peeling under the sun pretending to be law. The silence was pure. It was the kind of quiet I remembered from when my wife and I first bought this ranch. Before the brochures, before the rules, before the war. I walked down the driveway with my coffee steaming in hand, the gravel crunching steady beneath my boots. At the end, standing tall against the rising sun, was the mailbox. My mailbox. Solid, unbroken, gleaming black. And I'll admit, I smiled. It didn't take long for the sheriff's office to dig deeper. Travis hadn't just been harassing me. He'd been using his security team to intimidate half the neighborhood. Threats, bogus fines, even falsified foreclosure letters. The paper trail was there, hidden in the HOA's records, and once the investigation opened, it all came pouring out. Within weeks, Travis was facing charges not just for harassment, but for fraud, racketeering, and misuse of community funds. The SUVs he'd been parading as patrol cars, paid for with HOA dues. The men he hired? No licenses, no authority, just local muscle willing to play cop for cash. The board voted unanimously to remove him. Funny how quickly loyalty dries up when the sheriff starts asking questions. The neighbors who once crossed the street to avoid me started stopping by. Mr. Johnson, the same man who'd broken the silence the night of Travis's downfall, came by with a plate of cornbread his wife had baked. The Ramirez family invited us over for barbecue again, laughter drifting through the yard like it used to. People began talking, really talking, about how scared they'd been, how they'd painted their barns and trimmed their lawns, not out of pride but out of fear, and how seeing me stand up, stubborn as I was, gave them the courage to finally speak out. One woman told me through tears, "We were all waiting for someone to push back. We just didn't think it could be done." That stuck with me, because I hadn't wanted to be a leader. I just wanted peace. But sometimes peace only comes when you stand up and fight for it. Life on the ranch found its rhythm again. The cattle grazed undisturbed, the barn roof stayed red, and the fines stopped arriving in the mail. The shoebox of letters sat on the shelf, a reminder of the storm we'd weathered. The mailbox, well, I left the steel one standing. Some said it was overkill, but to me it was more than a mailbox. It was a monument, a line in the dirt that said, "This land, this life, this freedom, it's worth fighting for." Every time I walked past it, I remembered the sound of their SUVs crumpling against it. And I remembered that moment when fear turned into defiance, and defiance turned into justice. I'm 60 years old. I don't move as fast as I used to, and the years have weathered me. But one thing I've learned is this: bullies come in every shape and age. Sometimes they wear suits. Sometimes they flash fake badges. Sometimes they hide behind bylaws and boards. But the way you beat a bully hasn't changed since I was a boy. You stand your ground. You refuse to bend. You remind them that dignity can't be fiddled away, and freedom doesn't come with an HOA clause. Travis thought he owned this neighborhood. He thought fear would keep us quiet. But in the end, he was the one exposed, the one humiliated, the one carted off in handcuffs while the people he tried to control found their voices again. And as for me, I gained something I didn't expect. Not just peace on my land, but respect from my neighbors. A community reborn out of resistance. Sometimes, late in the evening, I'll sit on the porch as the sun dips low, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold. I'll watch the light catch on that black steel mailbox at the end of the drive, standing tall like a sentinel. And I'll think about my grandson in the military, about the letter he wrote me that once lay scattered in the mud. I'll think about my wife's hand on my shoulder when things looked darkest. And I'll think about the night the bullies came charging down my driveway, only to find out that sometimes the old man they thought they could break was the one they should have feared all along. Because peace isn't given, peace is earned, and sometimes peace is defended by steel.